It's the Age Has No Limit podcast. We're here to show and prove that your age shouldn't prevent you from designing and living the life you want. I'm your host, Patrice Davis. Let's get started. Welcome back to the podcast. So with me is Melissa Wesner. Melissa is a licensed clinical professional counselor, a Brainspotting Consultant, and founder of LifeSpring Counseling Services in Maryland. Melissa is also the host of the Dreaming and Doing podcast. I love that name, by the way. And it's a podcast for big dreamers and action takers. I can't wait to jump into your definition of big dreamers and action takers. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's so good to see you again.
Yes. So as you all will hear later on, Melissa and I have a little bit of a history together and some shared geographies, let's call it that. And so we'll get to dig into that a little bit later. So let's start with the thing that's, top of mind for me and probably for others as well. Let's start with what you describe as a big dreamer and action taker. And who are some of the people you believe fit into that category?
Yeah. So I think in some ways, when I think about who is a big dreamer, I think about people who give themselves permission to ideate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can think about who might not be a big dreamer or who doesn't allow themselves to be a big dreamer. And I think about people who shoot ideas down, right? Like when you're in a brainstorming session, you want to come up with as many ideas as possible. And the one thing you don't want to do when brainstorming is be the person who's like, oh, but that's not going to work because this, that, and the other. That's not the purpose of brainstorming, right? And so when we're dreaming, we're just giving ourselves permission to have these big ideas, these big aspirations. We're not shooting them down. We're not saying, well, that's not realistic. That's not possible. We're not engaging in that type of thinking or language. And I think in terms of action taking, I think certainly there are people who are like, well, that would be really nice, wouldn't it? Or, well, maybe one day, you hear people talk about the tomorrow club. I think people who are big action takers don't just think about how nice it would be to do this thing one day. They're the people who say, okay, well, how can we figure this out? What are the action steps that I can take rather than letting it be this passive dream that wouldn't it be nice, but I'm not actually going to do anything about it.
Yeah. So I think I may fall into that category of those big dreamers and action takers. And at least I think I am. Maybe others will think otherwise, but I definitely think I am. I'd rather not wait around to figure it out. Figuring out, yes, but I would rather not wait around to find out if it's possible or figure out or think myself out of whether it's possible or not, I guess is the best way to describe it. And of the podcast episodes you've recorded to date, because remember, guys, the name of her podcast is the Dreaming and Doing podcast. So of the episodes you've recorded to date, which big dreamer and action taker really, really resonated with you? What's the story that made you say, wow, that's so inspiring?
Yeah, the person who stands out to me is Jessica DePana. She is a therapist who has two businesses. She has a group counseling practice, but she also has an SEO consulting practice. And the reason that she stands out to me is she's a female business owner. She is married. She has two kids, and she and her family decided to go on a 6-month world cruise. Right.
Wow.
So a lot of people like yourself dream of traveling, right? But sometimes we're like, we dream about it and don't do it, right? Or we engage in limited thinking about like, that'd be nice, but that's not possible, right? And Jessica has as many reasons as the next person of why that possibly could not work, right? Well, I have two businesses, so I can't go away for 6 months and be on a cruise ship. I have to be there and manage the offices. My partner has a job, partner's a nurse. So like they have to go to work. We have these two school-age children, like they got to go to school. But you know what? They said, let's figure it out. Let's find a way to make that work. Her partner is going to have a job to go back to when they return, same company, right? She's found a way to manage her businesses remotely. Her children are getting homeschooled and they've integrated their travels into the curriculum. And not only that, but I think it was her son who came up with that idea. So I also think about, wow, what an important message she just taught her son. She could have said to her son, like, that's a really nice idea, but that's absolutely not possible. That's completely unrealistic. But she didn't do that. She said, okay, well, let's entertain this idea. Let's think about that. Could that be possible? And sure enough, they found a way to make that work.
Wow, that is pretty interesting because, as you said, she has her two businesses, which, she probably can find some flexibility there. She has children, K to 12 children. And then, of course, her partner is a nurse. So that is a lot of what may seem like obstacles, but she decided, you know what, we're going to make it happen. And that is really an interesting story. Now, we're going to shift a little bit to your specialization. You've mentioned several times therapists, either people that you have, that were, who inspired you, such as the story you just shared. And of course, at the top of the show, I did explain that you are a licensed clinical professional counselor. So there are a lot of people who may not know the difference between a therapist, a psychologist, and a licensed professional counselor, and a psychiatrist. And I'm asking because like I said, there are a lot of people who aren't aware of what the differences are. Tell me, what is a licensed professional counselor and how they're different from the three other professions I just shared.
Yeah. So a licensed clinical professional counselor has a master's degree. They have a master's degree. They have a license with the board in their state. And in order to become a licensed clinical professional counselor, you need to have that master's degree. You're going to probably have a year-long internship that you've done in grad school. You have to pass an exam. And then in order to be fully licensed, you have 2 years postgraduate school where you have to have X number of clinical hours, X number of administrative hours and supervision. In order to be fully licensed. But a psychologist might have like a PhD or a PsyD. So they have a higher level of education. And sometimes they do what therapists do, where they're doing counseling. They might have their own private practice. They might have a counseling practice. So they might be doing therapy. But also sometimes psychologists are also doing testing. So if someone loves doing testing for, let's say, children, or testing for autism or ADHD, or something, they might be doing some type of testing. And a psychiatrist is someone who is a doctor, and they prescribe medication. So a lot of times psychiatrists today, that's what they're doing. They are prescribing medication. If it's a doctor, a psychiatrist who accepts insurance, your first visit might be an hour long because they're getting history. But after that, most people can expect a 15-minute visit in the room.
Wow.
And then you're going to go. If you're paying out of network, you're not using your insurance, then in those cases, you can expect to have more time with the psychiatrist. But that's important to know because sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, the doctor didn't even ask me questions. They didn't talk to me about this. It was, it's all about the medication, because that really is what many psychiatrists, that's the focus of their job these days.
Interesting. And so the difference between a licensed professional counselor and a therapist, and of course, so I'm not sure where the differences may be there.
Yeah. So a licensed clinical, so that's a good question, right? So at the master's level, you might see people who are licensed as a licensed clinical professional counselor, but also use the term therapist. So basically you can see a psychologist, counselor, or social worker actually might refer to themselves as therapists. So you're right. That can be a little bit confusing, right? And people can work at group counseling practices or private practices and be psychologists, counselors, or social workers, and all provide therapy.
Wow. So yeah, that's why it's confusing for those of us.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make. Yeah, so that is why it can be confusing for people.
Yeah. But I think it's important. The word licensed is what I'm hearing and what I'm really paying attention to, and what I'll now be looking for. If and when I decide, this is I need a certain kind of therapy or amount of therapy. And now I have a better idea of what to expect from a psychiatrist, from a psychologist, and, an LPC licensed professional counselor. And I also noticed on your website, you actually have your license number. You and all of your team members have your license number. And so, that's also good to know. So Brainspotting, you are the first person I see. I know you get excited every time we talk about Brainspotting. So you're the first person that I ever heard say that word, brain spotting. And you are the second guest on this podcast to have a brain spotting or be a brain spotting consultant. So if you can describe what it is for our viewers, that'll be great.
Yeah. So I love brain spotting, as you already know. If you talk to me for like 5 minutes, I can blab about it. So brain spotting is a treatment modality. I mean, it can be used by people who are therapists, but there are coaches, acupuncturists who also get trained in brain spotting. But using the language that we use in the therapy world, it's a treatment modality. It's a tool that we use. It's a brain and body-based intervention. So when you're doing regular talk therapy, just to give a comparison, when you're doing regular talk therapy, there's talking back and forth. When you're doing that, you're using one particular part of your brain. When we're doing brain spotting, we are using a deeper part of your brain and body. So with brain spotting, people don't actually have to do a lot of talking in order for processing to happen. So we say with brain spotting that where you look affects how you feel. And so when someone wants to do brain spotting in therapy, we might say, okay, well, what do you want to work on today? Well, I want to work on this really difficult thing that happened to me as a child. Someone might say what that is, but then we're going to help them find a location in their visual field that connects to the activation in their body, right? And so sometimes, so we can guide people to a location in their visual field. They'll stay on that spot and processing will naturally occur. Thoughts, memories, physical sensations, emotions will naturally show up and kind of pivot throughout the experience. And they can choose to talk about what's coming up or they cannot. But to give you an example, we're engaging in brain spotting all of the time, right? It sounds a little bit weird. You're like, what are you talking about? You find a spot in your visual field, but think about it. When you're talking to someone, if I said to you, Patrice, well, what did you do last weekend?
Should I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So last weekend I spent some time in rural in the country where I visited and where I'm visiting, and I enjoyed myself.
Yeah. So I don't know if you noticed, but, and if you play this recording, right, as soon as you're like your eyes are looking around to try to find that location where that information is stored in your brain and body. So sometimes what happens is you're talking to someone and they're telling you about their weekend or whatever, and they're just standing on a spot for a prolonged period of time because it's that spot where they are best able to access the information that's stored in their brain and body, and that maybe they're trying to communicate to somebody else as well. And so we're trained to help people find these locations in their visual fields to process information that's stored deeply in their brain and body. But we do it all the time and we're just not aware. So once we start paying attention to where do people's eyes go when they're talking, we can be like, oh, that must be where they're accessing that information.
So, obviously you're a big believer in the technique, in the modality. And so what would you say is the biggest breakthrough that you've seen? And I know you obviously there's client information that you can't share, but is there a way that you can describe a client experience that was one of the biggest breakthroughs that you've used that modality for, and you were able to see the benefits from it?
Yeah, I would say there's a few things that maybe not a specific person or case, but some things that I think make it really unique, right? Are that people are able to gain new insights, things that they couldn't just recall by memory. Like, what did you eat for breakfast? Well, I had bacon and eggs, right? Like you can recall that quickly, but sometimes there's information that comes up that people had forgotten about or didn't recognize was influencing how they're feeling or acting. After brain spotting, let's say a traumatic event, sometimes people say, I know that that thing still happened, but it feels smaller now. It feels further away now. I'm not getting as emotionally activated around that. That's a pretty common response. And I think the other thing that I really enjoy about it is, I mean, everyone has their own personality, and you get to see personality when you're interacting with people, talking with them, but also when you're brain spotting, I just feel like it's like you really get to see someone's brain, right? So it's just kind of cool to see how different people's brains operate. I work with people who are really creative, and so sometimes they spontaneously engage in movement while we're brain spotting. I've seen people who have creative in terms of like different types of artistic stuff, and they also engage in movement or very colorful imagery. And so just seeing how people's brains are so very different when we're processing, I find really interesting. And also when we're doing, like, a lot of people talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, and there's been a lot of research around it. And, you know, every creator of a modality wants theirs to be shown that there's research to support it and why it's the best. But sometimes when we're engaging in these cognitive approaches, like cognitive behavioral therapy, someone can learn a strategy to say, I recognize that that's an unhelpful or inaccurate thought. I have strategies to change or reframe the thought into something that's more helpful, accurate, and true. But sometimes people say, even though I know that I am not unworthy, I know that that is an unhelpful, inaccurate statement, that I'm unworthy, I still feel that in the core of my being. Even though I know the strategies, I know it's not true, I still feel it in the core. And so I find that these body-based modalities like brain spotting allow us to get deeper and into the core when these other cognitive approaches just aren't getting all the way there.
Got it. That makes sense. And I'm obviously not in, and this is my specialty. I'm not educated in this space, but it makes sense that if there's a body-based element to what you're really trying to get at, and sometimes our bodies are reacting to things that we aren't even aware of, at least at a cognitive level, it makes sense that, you know, you can learn more by looking at the way a person's body moves. But yeah, that may, you know, just kind of thinking that through. So now I'm really, really interested in brain spotting. I remember you actually offered it to everyone in our mastermind. And so, you know, now if you'd ask, they'd be like, yeah, choose me, you know. So
yes. Well,
go ahead.
The other thing that I would add about that, so one, I think brain spotting is absolutely amazing, and business owners can use it, I mean, for different things. But the other thing that I think is really important for people to know is that, again, like I said, people who create these treatment modalities want to do research. They want to show that it's effective. Insurance companies want to know that people are using evidence-based approaches and all of that. However, research consistently supports that the single most important predictor of successful outcomes in therapy is having a strong working relationship with your therapist. It's not about the treatment modality that they're using. It's about having a good fit with your therapist, feeling comfortable, feeling like you can open up. And that's important because even with something like brain spotting, where people don't have to open up, like sometimes people feel shame about something that they might have experienced, so they don't want to talk about it. It's difficult. But sometimes people hear, well, you don't have to talk. So just come on, do your thing, brain spot me. But even brain spotting requires a relationship where there is trust and there's attunement. If you show up and you are someone who is guarded and doesn't trust people and doesn't want to trust the therapist that you're working with, your body will block the process, right? You still have to have a foundation of trust to do that work.
Yeah. And that makes, it's so interesting you brought that up, understanding that people have different levels of trust and when they're willing to open up and trust, whether it's professional relationships, personal relationships. And I'm so glad that you said that, because it's helping me think through, just some of the different interactions that we all have every day as business owners and, you know, even when we're interacting with clients. So really, really appreciate that. We didn't really talk about Melissa, the person. Like, where's Melissa from? Do you have any siblings? And we cannot end this episode without finding more about you, the person.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in a little village, literally a village in Pennsylvania. where there is absolutely nothing to do. It's the coal region in Pennsylvania. It's considered an economically depressed region. And I used to tell my parents growing up that I wanted to live in the city when I grew up. And so I did eventually. I ended up living in Baltimore City for a while. And I have 3 sisters. So we're a household of all girls, and I'm the oldest. And I have 0 children, but I have a great partner, and I am in a competition with at least one sibling about who can be the best aunt. I think I'm in the favorite aunt box for right now. Yes. So yeah, so those are some things that I find fun.
Yeah. Now, do you mind telling me what county? And I'll tell you why I asked. I'll tell you why I asked.
In Pennsylvania or in
Pennsylvania?
Oh, I grew up in Schuylkill County.
So the reason I ask is because one of my current clients, is that near Carbon County, Lehigh Valley area?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my current clients is from that area. So I've learned about Carbon County, and I can't say Schuylkill. I think that's what you said. I can't say what I see on paper, and just some of the challenges that they've experienced. And so it's interesting. Now we have a fourth thing in common. So I touched on the fact just a few minutes ago that you and I were in the same mastermind. And as I shared earlier, Melissa is also a business owner. She is the founder of LifeSpring Counseling Services in Maryland. And that's where one of our connections are. I also used to live in Maryland. I lived in Maryland for, I think about 15 years. So what made you decide to start your business? And what do you think you enjoy the most about your work as a licensed professional counselor?
Yeah. So I wish I had a pretty answer. But the reality is that my work as a counselor was never on my radar. I actually have an undergraduate degree in Christian ministry. I graduated from school, and then I was like, okay, well, what are you going to do with that? Because I don't want to work in a church. And I looked at other opportunities, and I was like, this is not going to be a fit for me. Yeah. And so I ended up doing AmeriCorps for a year, and I was like, well, this is your year to like figure out what you're going to do with your life. And I considered nursing school or counseling. And so I ended up going to school at Hopkins for counseling. I didn't know what I was getting into. I was just like crossing my fingers, hoping this was going to be a good fit. Got my degree. Fortunately, I ended up working in a drug and alcohol treatment facility that turned out to be a really good fit. I was there for 7 years, and, things kept coming, but I never thought I would be a counselor. It was never on my radar. I never thought I would open up a practice. I never thought I would have a group practice. So none of those things were ever on my radar. But my favorite part is really talking to people. I think that, a lot of times even my clients will say, I have no idea how you do this all day. I could never sit here and listen to people. Yeah. And sometimes I'm like, I can't believe I get paid to do this. Like, I literally get paid to hang out with people. I literally get paid to like listen to people. And I find it so interesting because as a therapist, like I'm there to support and also to provide some observations and, coping strategies and stuff like that. But you also learn so much about people and life. You might learn a lot about people who are in management and, struggles that come up. You might learn about struggles people encounter in middle age, right? And so I just feel like you learn a lot about life. And even if it's a stage of life that you haven't been through yourself just yet, you're learning from other people's experiences. So that way, when and if when you get to that stage in life, you'll be like, yeah, this is normal. Like all these other people I talked to, like that was something they navigated as well. And so you're constantly learning just by talking to people. And my love language is quality time. So getting to hang out with people all day long and have conversations.
Yeah, that sounds like it's so interesting you say that. So even though I genuinely enjoy talking to people because that's just how I am, I actually do get energy, so to speak, from talking to people. I do still find myself drained at the end of the day. I don't know if it's because most of my talking is through Zoom with my clients. And there's some I will call it tension, not necessarily bad tension, but tension because you're engaging with the client. You want to make sure you're doing everything well. I do feel drained. So that's interesting that I enjoy it, but I do still feel drained. Do you feel drained at all sometimes at the end of your day? Because you're giving throughout the day.
Yeah, if I have back-to-back sessions and I don't have a break, like therapists joke about like having time to go to the bathroom. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I don't have time to eat
Mm-hmm.
food, hydrate, or go to the bathroom, like that's not great. Like
Yeah.
back-to-back appointments might be too much. But I actually read an interesting statistic and I can't remember where I saw it. It's gonna get on my nerves, but it was about socialization, and they were talking about socialization or like interactions online, like they
Mm-hmm.
can be beneficial, but up to a point. After a point, people might feel more drained.
Yeah.
So that study is popping into my head, but also I know at the start of the pandemic, that was a big thing that therapists were looking at, like
Mm-hmm.
maybe eye strain or not being able to feel energy on the screen in the way that you might in a room, right? And how does that feel different? Or like the amount of like sitting that you're doing compared to, walking from your office to the bathroom, even if you're in an office building. So I think the amount of time that we're sitting. Also, some people talk about like how close are you to someone's face? I know for some people that was distracting if they don't like looking at themselves on the screen. That was using up some extra energy, or like how close is this other person's face to my face? Does that feel intrusive?
Hmm.
So I know those are all things that I would hear from people at the start of the pandemic when everyone moved online.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's again giving me a little bit more perspective, because I do remember a lot more of people. First of all, I started learning more about the different the different ways that therapy could be offered online. But again, I never thought about it from the professional's point of view, and certainly not from the person who is the recipient of that service, right? So thanks for shedding some light on that. Now, for those of you who are listening, Melissa specializes in trauma, depression, sexual health and wellness issues that impact small business owners, therapy for therapists, brain spotting, as you've heard, and more. So, what would you say is a challenge that's unique to therapists? Because I hadn't thought about therapy for therapists. I figured therapists would also need their own therapy because of all the things that they may be absorbing or not. But I would love to get just a little bit of insight into what therapists, some unique challenges they may experience.
Yeah. So it can depend on the person and maybe where they are in their career. But the main thing that I would say is remembering that therapists are humans too. We grew up in families that weren't perfect, just like everybody else. There's always that family history stuff that can come into play as therapists, move into adulthood, navigating their family stuff that has happened that might be ongoing. Sometimes therapists are looking for their own couples counseling, which I don't do couples counseling. And also, I would say new therapists who are newer to the field, imposter syndrome is a really big thing. Do I know what I'm doing? So some confidence as they're moving into that role as a therapist. And also sometimes therapists feeling inadequate. And this sometimes can come up in supervision with therapists, is feeling the need to fix the people that they work with, like feeling like it's my responsibility to fix this person. I need to know exactly what to do, exactly what to say. I need to have the perfect worksheet to give them. And realizing like that's not the role, right? It's not your responsibility to fix anybody. Like people aren't broken either. And so we can like take away some of that expectation that you need to have a magic wand and fix people. So sometimes imposter syndrome stuff, I would say, is a big thing. Yeah, and just life stuff that can come up if you have aging parents, if there's stuff going on in your relationship, maybe stuff with your own children that's going on. All of those regular life things that can come up might also be things that therapists are looking for counseling for as well.
And it's so first of all, I know I have several other follow-up questions to that, but I think we want to learn a little bit more about other aspects of Melissa. I typically try to dig into the person that's speaking after we really have an opportunity to kind of pick their brains about what stands out for them. And again, the name of the podcast and the types of people that you like to feature on the podcast were really what I wanted to pull out. Then obviously learn a little bit about what you do, right? And about your business. But one of the things I also find very interesting is that you created the Making the Most of Therapy journal. And I hadn't heard about that. And again, in our our time together as participants in the mastermind. And it's currently available on Amazon. Tell us what made you decide to create it, and how do you think that people will get the most out of using your journal?
Yeah, so we created this journal because we have a lot of people at our office who are, I would say a lot of the people who come to my office are very conscientious individuals. They are really into personal or professional development, and they're really growth oriented. So I always tell people therapy is an investment of your time, energy, and resources. And a lot of the people that we work with, like, they want to know, am I getting better? Am I making progress? What else can I do between my sessions? And so we've designed this workbook so that people who are in therapy can feel like they're maximizing that experience. It helps them with smart goal setting so they can, and therapists will help you come up with your goals as well, but it gives people an opportunity to be really intentional about their goals for therapy. There are some planning sheets so they can plan, how can I be prepared for my therapy session? Some of our clients will just in general come prepared with bullet points of like, okay, these are the things that I want to go over today. But then there are other people who are more of like, let me just wing it. And I don't have a plan. I'm here and we'll see where it goes. But for people who want to be really intentional, we have some things in there to give them guidance to plan for the session, to make sure that whatever it is that they want to get out of the session, they're getting it, making notes. Because also there's work that has to get done between your visits, between your therapy sessions. So if you're learning coping strategies, like maybe you're learning about diaphragmatic breathing or mindfulness skills, or maybe you're learning how to reframe thoughts that are not so helpful. You're trying to catch them and reframe them. You might have some like quote unquote homework to do so that you can practice these new skills between your sessions. So when life is getting real, this is the time that we want to use these strategies. And so knowing that it's not just about that 1 hour a week, but really putting some new tools into practice between your sessions. And so we also have some like journaling activities in there. But for people who are like, I really want to make the most of this. Am I making progress? Am I growing? This gives them something really concrete to use to prepare for sessions and plan after them.
Well, first of all, it's also a literal container of, because I have actually been in therapy about, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. And I do remember being assigned, we'll put homework in air quotes, because that is, and according to my therapist, that is where some of the learning can really happen. It's not necessarily the hour that you're sitting with the professional. It's when you step away and you're thinking about some of the things that you are prodded to uncover during the session. And then the writing in a tool or in a container or in your journal is a great way to, again, have it in one place. It's also a nice, I think, place to go back to in about a year to see, like you said, how much progress have I made? Well, I have a journal where I know it's going to be, and it's not in one of these 6 notebooks that I typically keep in, my shopping list then. So this is it's a great idea. So we're going to really, really focus on some of the other things that you do as well. You're the host of a new business retreat for entrepreneurs. And so tell us about why you decided, well, actually tell me, what do you think any person that's listening would want to know for them to say, yes, I definitely want to sign up for the next retreat that Melissa is hosting? The name of the retreat and tell me what's that pull? What makes people want to come?
Yeah. So right now we don't have another one planned. We just had our retreat in April in Costa Rica. So I don't have another one planned. But personally, I think retreats are great for people who are looking for experiential learning, right? Like it's one thing to go to a classroom or to a workshop and you're learning from a book or from a PowerPoint slide. It's quite another to have an immersive and experiential learning opportunity. So I think that that's one of the things that I find valuable about going on retreats, is that it's experiential, it's immersive, it's a different way of like integrating information into your whole being and body through action and experience. But also I think that retreats are great for building community. You can go to a networking event, or you can go to a class and learn something, but then you're all going to go home and there's not a lot of time for interaction. But when you're on a retreat, you are spending extended amounts of time with people, really getting to know them. And so at least a retreat for business owners, like if, you hear people say, well, you do business with the people that you know, like, and trust. Well, how do you know if you know, like, and trust someone? Like maybe you get a referral from someone else. But if you're hanging out with someone at a retreat and you're spending extended time with them, 7 days for 12 hours a day or whatever, you really get a sense of the person, how they show up, how they talk about their business and their work. Would I want to work with that person? Do I like that person? Do I like how they talk about their business and about how they talk about their clients? And so I think that that's a really great way to build relationships. I mean, you might know this is someone I want to partner with, or maybe this is someone I could refer people to myself. Maybe I don't need their services, but I would happily refer them to this service.
Yeah. Okay. And so for those of you who are, want to learn more about Melissa's counseling services or the podcast, you can certainly learn more about her practice at lifespringcounseling.net. Again, that's lifespringcounseling.net, and about her podcast at dreaminganddoing.net. Every time I say that, you've probably been told that before, like just saying the words of the podcast makes me smile. The Dreaming and Doing podcast. Well, it's the dreaminganddoing.net, but it's the Dreaming and Doing podcast. That makes my heart sing, because again, I'm one of those ladies that like to just dream and get it done.
Yes.
So you wrote something that really stood out to me. You said, if there's something I want to do, I do it. I'm doing it with the neck shake. I don't like people telling me what I can't do. Think of the last time someone told you what you can't do, and how did you respond?
Yeah, I'm almost afraid to answer because I'm a sucker for it. Like that's how much it annoys me, but it's not in a good way.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm hesitant. I don't want people using it on me.
Yeah.
So one, if I do want to do something, like I'm going to do it, I'm going to figure out how I can make it happen. But I don't like people telling me what I can't do. I mean, there's one story I talk about where my dad at the dining room table told me he didn't think I could run a marathon. And so I did run the marathon, and the morning that I went to go run the marathon, I also made a sign. I left a sign behind for him to hold that says, I lost a bet today. My daughter can run a marathon.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a fun example. We have a great picture of me running in the race with my dad holding that sign. But sometimes when people are like selling a product or a service and you're having that like back and forth email exchange, like when people are like, well, maybe this just isn't for you at this time. Like there's like a, how are you going to tell me what is or is not for me at this time? And then, but there are times where I'm like, just for that, I'm going to sign up, but like that's terrible, right? Like,
yeah. So now we know how to sell something to Melissa.
I know. I'm like, do I want that to be out there in the world?
Yeah. That's so funny. I love that. I enjoy it, but I definitely see how, at least what I don't want to use the word trigger. I just don't like that word, but at least right, that it's there. And if a person were to use it in the wrong way, they can probably convince you to do what they really wanted you to do. So
yes.
So funny.
Like the nerve.
I know. And so by the way, the other thing that I think I didn't share with our audience, which is fine. So not only were we in the business program together, and I used to live in Maryland. I don't think if I told you this, that my daughter, you went to Hopkins for grad school. My daughter went to Hopkins for undergrad. And so we always joke, the next time I come to Baltimore and I actually have time to spare, I have got to reach out to Melissa so we can have lunch, have dinner, just hang out a little. But yeah, this has been great getting to know a little bit more about you. And so we have about 2 more questions. The first one is, what does an age has no limit life mean to you?
Yes. Well, I love that because and what I love about it is that in my role as a therapist, and I guess even in my personal life, so many times I hear people using limiting language around their age. right? Especially when it comes to work and their age. Well, once you're this age, no one else is going to hire you. And again, that's very limiting thinking, right? You're limiting your opportunities because you're saying what you think other people's opinions are of your age, right? So again, that thinking can limit us, right? If you're unhappy in your job and you're not looking for another one because you think no one else is going to hire you because of your age, you're limiting your opportunities because of what you think other people think. And not to say that there's no, people haven't had histories to validate some of those beliefs, but we see these really cool stories in the news sometimes, like 93-year-old woman just got a high school diploma. Like, how cool is that? Right? Like this person was like, yeah, I'm 93 and what? I want my diploma. Like it's now or never, and it's going to be now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up. Again, going back to some of the themes, it's so interesting. Some of the themes that are coming up in almost all of the episodes that we've had on the Age Has No Limit podcast is the idea behind how your thoughts can be limiting. And so just you're limiting yourself because there are people, and I was one of them actually, that thought, well, I am this age and I know, and this is my thinking, that I probably won't be considered for this position because, ageism, or because I know that they may want to have more new people come into the field for whatever reason. That, like you said, there may be evidence to that, but why eliminate, immediately, let's say, cut yourself off from opportunities because by thinking that from, to begin with. And because then you're not even going to try. So that's the idea, I guess, so I appreciate you making it look a little bit more practical for those of us who may not be thinking or understanding how their thoughts can truly impact the outcomes in their lives.
Yeah.
And then my final question, do you have a bucket list? And if you do, what's one thing on that bucket list that you are just really itching to do?
Yeah, I don't have a bucket list per se, but I would say one of my big dreams is I would love to have a family commune. I know that word sounds culty. I got to find a better word for it. But I would love to have like a giant piece of land that has these little housing structures on them where my whole family could live. And I dream of like, we could rotate lawn mowing, like Tuesday, this week, this person mows the lawn, next week it's someone else. And like, maybe Wednesday dinner is at this person's house and Thursday night we eat at this person's house. And, or if like someone has kids, I don't have any, but someone has kids, they'd be like, go to your aunt's house. I need to run to the store. I just think that would be so fun. My family members are not interested at all in my little idea. Maybe my parents are coming around. They're figuring out what they want to do next in life, but everyone else is like, we're good.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because number one, those kinds of communities do exist, as I'm sure you're aware. My first question to you, my follow-up question until you kind of cut it off at the knee was, well, what's preventing you from doing that? Number one, it sounds like only your parents would be, even interested, and, others aren't. Before we end, want to thank you for taking the time out to spend some time and tell us a little bit about the work that you do and all the amazing things that you've accomplished. I really, really wanted to have a little bit more time to dig into what made you decide to actually open your firm, your practice, and just a little bit more about what you do. But we have limited time. Maybe there'll be a part two. But again, really, really thank you for your time. I didn't know if you wanted to end by sharing anything else other than making sure we remind people where they can find out about your podcast and where they can find out about your practice.
Yes. I guess the only other thing to add about my work is I have a group counseling practice, and it's really important to me at my practice is that we look for therapists who really care about their clients, who really love the work that they do, and that we're providing a really welcoming space for our clients so clients can share without being worried about judgment. And we want clients to feel like they can talk to us and that someone's going to have my back, right? And so those are some of the things that are really important to us as a counseling practice. We're an insurance-friendly counseling practice. So we accept insurance as a means of making mental health care accessible and affordable. Accepting insurance has its annoying things about it. But we really want people to be able to access counseling services.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So for our viewers who are watching us on YouTube and those of us who are listening on Spotify or Apple, I just want to thank you so much for listening. And I will definitely want to thank Melissa again for her time. I'm glad she was able to, make some time for us and, to serve as yet another example of a person who lives and believes that age has no limit.